Okay, so this is going to be a much shorter stream than usual as far as my updates and analyses go, because it's going to contain precisely one build and like its variant, whereas most of the other ones are a smattering of build updates at the same time. As you know, you get the different update versions and they have their different balance changes and new items and whatnot. But although they did say like we are getting a new update, what is it, next week, something like that. In any case, that's going to probably change some stuff around. Might get some of the new teased things like bipedal legs. Maybe that would be nice. I don't think we're going to be so lucky, but it would be cool. But like we're kind of in the same spot I was 2-3 weeks ago when I did the last update video, which is I now have the Cyclops, so I can work on updating my reloading builds. But because of the energy changes and the Cyclops taking an additional energy point over the flywheel, I can't always fit it on all of the builds, so it's not so easy to just, you know, drop it in and update things for a lot of them. And I still don't have the second a kilo, which would be for the heating cooling builds. So the event, the battle pass, has me at level 78 right now, so I've still completed every challenge up till now, including the expiring dailies. So on Tuesday, I was at level 73, which checks out. You get 1 level from starting the battle pass, you get 1 level from purchasing the battle pass, and then you get 7.1 levels per week. So after it finishing the 10th week, I had 71 levels plus 1 plus 1. I was exactly level 73. We've now started a new week with weeklies for Wednesday, Thursday, and then of course we'll get resets for Friday, Saturday, so on and so forth. But that puts me at level 79 currently, and in order to afford my first legendary with lighters, I need another 200. And we get that at level 85. So the math works out that you'll have Thursday, Friday, Saturday's reset, and then I'll have this level, and then a little bit of EXP the next Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, have that level, and then we'll get another 5 from Wednesday with the weekly reset, so that'll put me exactly there. That'll let me get a second a kilo, and then that'll let me update all of the heating cooling builds and also look at the math of in a kilo or 2 a kilos versus 2 seals or 2 shivers or a shiver and a seal, since individually they're better at their respective tasks, but I think once you get 2+ of them, the kilo is going to end up outperforming it. So might end up having to do some recording and analysis of overheat cycle times for different weapons. So I know, for instance, the implementation of the perk decay for the Arbiters and the Cyclones kind of changes what they're actually looking to use, whereas before it was all just radiators. Now if you have a decent blend, you can obviously still fire for longer, but also keep the perk up and lose less of it every time you have a overheat cycle. So I have to do some math with that. I still feel like for the stats of like the rare items pretty much overshadowing their epic ones, especially with all these power score restricted events we're getting, and even just the weekly clan confrontation, I feel like the kilo would be better off as a 3 energy drain and then bump up the stats a little bit more, but in any case they're not going with that, and I have no reason to believe that they'll change to that, although it would be cool. So as far as the actual stuff I can build with today, it's like I said, is pretty much just what I have the Cyclops for. So I can actually open up the other spreadsheet, which I just had open and then shut down. So a lot of build reworks, but some of them are going to be fairly intensive and not specifically relevant to just the Cyclops. So again, a little bit harder to just drop in the new module and call it at that. But a lot of them are evidently outdated. So I was looking at the Jawbreaker and then the Jawbreaker variant. which is actually, I have this backwards. This is the minigun one, so it should just be the energy changes, not the Cyclops, because the Cyclops is for the Avalanche Jawbreaker, which is the one we're going to be looking at today. So we have our exhibition, and then we have the two variants up here. So we have this one, which is much more recent, update 14. I reworked it threw in the Odin, you know, adjusted the energy accordingly, and then immediately after we got the energy changes. But in any case, I don't really have a good answer for what to spend that one remaining energy point on. I was kind of debating swapping out the barrier for the Aegis Prime, since it's 4 energy versus 3, but since this is really only something I'm using in raids anyway, the like infinite ammo nature of the barrier works a little bit better. I can also protect the team a bit more, which is nice and leans into the whole support build of the cohort a little bit more. But it's not good, like it's not good compared to like other things, like especially, you know, the go-to, the Retchers, the Cyclones, the Still Ones, the Whirlwinds. Blow this out of the water in raid, so I only really use it when I feel like doing it, or it's like a low risk, like a medium raid or something, and I don't mind how long it takes, just because the Reapers don't tend to be particularly high performance there, unfortunately. Some of the other things I was looking at updating, originally I wasn't looking at changing the Avalanche one, but that's the one that I have changed and currently have sitting in my garage. Whereas I was looking at maybe doing some more updates on this one, mostly trying to fill out that mass limit a little bit more with some of the newer parts, but I don't really get any good results. So one of the things to consider is I have these Reapers on the Omamori, but if I wanted to, for instance, add the freight train plow to the front of it, I would need to shove the cabin back one, or otherwise the front plow would also be shoved forward one, since the freight train plow is 4 high rather than 3 high. And that means that I'd either have my guns not centered with the armor or the chassis or the tracks anymore, or I'd have to look at spreading out the Reapers and then pushing them forward, which again pushing the cabin backwards, which means that I either can't have an Omamori on them, or I have them more at risk for being destroyed from the side, which, to be fair, is pretty much just protected by a reflector and the height of the build now to begin with. And again, it's PvE, it technically doesn't really matter, but I don't want to completely forsake whatever I could or want to do with PvP just for the sake of, oh, I'm not going to use it there, because like if this were a valid usable PvP build, I'd use it there, but it's not. So if something changes in the future, that'd be nice. Like in theory, swapping out the Reapers for Devourers is an option, though the Devourers do require a reload module, and thus that would eat into something else, which would most likely end up having me reload or remove the barrier. And like I said, I could also remove the Omamori and then spread the guns out. I could look at replacing the Omamori with a averter, since we're basically leaning pretty heavily into D-res with this anyway, since it's the cohort cabin, it's the Grizzly co-driver. Having the Omamori attached to the guns is certainly better than having it attached to something like the cabin, which is going to chew through that bonus pretty quickly, especially since we have that 5,000 plus EHP. But not super convinced on that either, and so it's just, the build's just kind of essentially been in limbo. I'm still pretty happy with running the Pegasus engine and running the 5 tracks, including the inside one on the rear, although that does limit where I can put a lot of the modules, and that was a large part of the issues I had with the Avalanche version. But that's just due to the nature of having more hardware for it, whereas with the Reapers, they literally don't need anything else other than ammo crates, and I can just tuck those underneath the integrated fenders of the cohort pretty easy. So that's where this is standing. Again, it's more viable in raids, certainly. Whether or not I will continue to use it, I don't know. PvP viable, certainly not. But it's essentially just going to kind of sit here until some other development on the energy side of things that allows me to, for instance, put on a Doppler, or I decide to swap out the averter and then put on a Doppler or something like that. I don't know. It's sort of the easy-ish answer in the meantime, but it also involves shifting a lot of the other parts on the inside, and again, is a, at best, PvE build that I'm not really using a whole lot, so I'm not too concerned on getting that updated. The Avalanche variant is an older version, which didn't include the new, well, quote-unquote new, since this was uploaded like a year and a half ago, cohort with the mass. So with all the changes that have happened, it's slightly over mass. That's another part of the reason why I ended up changing it out on this one. And then it's still running the Colossus engine to boost the durability of the tracks, but again, realistically, like, I already have 5 armored tracks on it. The weaker points of it at this point by far is the frames, especially having to wrap them around modules. So I'm not actually too concerned about the durability of them specifically, as well as I have enough tonnage given by 5 armor tracks anyway to run the mass and the Pegasus, so there's little value in not doing so. So to that end, we have swapped out this one to the one I have in the garage, which I'll go over. So I changed out the back to be a little bit more consistent with the other one, which is maybe a more abrupt of a transition from the top armor to the flat at the back, but I ended up liking the profile that I did with the rework for the minigun version anyway, more than this one, so sort of just carrying that over. We mucked about with the internals quite a bit, and we actually have this one downloaded in my garage so I can go through it piece by piece. So this is the old version, so just the same one I had up on exhibition, which means I can also remove that one and then save over this one, re-upload it, and have 2 more slots available. But in any case, so you can see some analogs, not really any exciting changes per se for modules, since most of these are being replaced with newer ones anyway, but that's the nature of the game, especially, like I said, when you sit on the build for a year and a half. So you'll see we have about 3,000 durability with this, and that is with the Dura Radar Power fused cohort from Doomsday Cars, and the the Colossus engine, which means that we're currently over mass. So with the new one, we're looking at 4,000 health, which is a little bit funny because this is without a durability fusion on the cabin, even though that's what this one has, but of course it scales off of the amount of durability you have, thus has a higher effect the more durability you have, and, you know, being able to have an extra 2,400 mass, as well as an extra 800 saved from the cabin having a mass fusion, is enough to give me another fairly significant bump in durability, since of course most of these modules and other parts aren't changing in mass, so any mass that I do save elsewhere can basically just be turned directly into armor. You'll also note that we recentered the vehicle, since I didn't really like the freight train plow on the front counting for the total length of the vehicle and changing the center, because I feel like it's sort of like just an additional plow. It's not really part of the build itself per se, if that makes sense. So we recentered that. We also increased the armor length on the top, since these crane parts we have in sets of 4, which is fairly convenient. And again, we have the extra mass for it. You'll note the sideboard hasn't changed because this thing looks sleek as fuck already, and we don't really have any 3 wide or 4 wide armor pieces that'll fit the same roll well, so it's probably going to stay looking like this indefinitely until such a time as we get a 3 or 4 wide equivalent part of these, which I expect like never. Also note that it wraps around the front and the weaponry a heck of a lot better than the double train plows for the minigun version, another plus for this build, this configuration. And then, like I said, we flattened out the back, which the flares are doing a really good job of masking right now, but we flattened out the back a little bit more, gave it the APC parts, and then of course the transition was removed, but it probably wouldn't have survived anyway with me having this increased length on the top, because having that Mempo bumper, sorry, not bumper, having that Mempo Syndicate part there, like, ended up fitting pretty nice and kind of helped with the aesthetic, but it doesn't actually quite look like it belongs there either. And like, it's large and not really effectively doing anything other than trying to help with the aesthetic of it. And if we just get rid of it entirely, then we don't really lose anything. So also got rid of the RD2 Keen. That is because we ended up getting the extra energy from going from the Apollo to the Odin, which let me upgrade from the Flywheel to the Cyclops, and then also have an energy point save going from an Omamori to an Averter for very much the same reason as discussed with the consideration with the other one, which is when you have it attached to a front damage soaking component and you don't have a shield to be able to recharge that, like with the Relentless. So this is stacking damage reduction on damage reduction, but it has a shield, which means that it can actually manage to last a recharge cycle and get it back up. Whereas with this, if I had an Omamori on it and or the cabin, if that pops, then chances are good I'm going to keep taking damage and not be able to recoup that 50% damage reduction by the time I've lost already a significant part of the build. Additionally, as has been discussed with the minigun version, it's not as effective to only stack damage reduction or damage resistance. You ideally want a blend of both, but again, the Relentless leads itself to stacking damage reduction a lot easier, whereas this one stacks damage resistance just as a part of what it is. Grizzly Cabin Co-Driver gives damage resistance to the entire build. The Cohort gives damage resistance. The Avalanche gives itself damage resistance. And with a Averter, I can go even further with that, which again, in theory, could use it for the just the gun or just the cabin or both, but also means that if I shoot it once, even against my own build with the Avalanche, it gets popped and then, you know, shot off the next time, essentially. So with all of those considerations, got this. I will say, extending this front up, I'm not super sold on. I don't like how it ended up cutting into like the window view of them, but this is with it currently centered, and my other option would be using like the crane hull parts, which stick out quite a bit further, or not having the quote-unquote correct end cap here to shorten it. So I don't really know that I have a better answer. In any case, it almost looks like a fucking clown from the front with the little conical hair pieces and then a big ass nose. So who knows, maybe at some point for an April Fool's joke I'll end up just like stickering this to look like one, but that wasn't the intention and is sort of a unfortunate thing to have been brought out of it. So as far as the back, we ended up removing the additional 1x8 frames that I had here to make this a 3-wide area. Reason being that it doesn't really make the armored track more likely to stay on now that they've changed the mesh so that it's symmetrical and always 3 pips wide, offset from its mounting point. Having it attached on one side or the other aesthetically didn't center it differently, which is specifically something I had considered before they had redone the mesh. So now that that's not a factor, just having it to the one side, which is also a lot harder to destroy, since although, you know, you could have a 2x8 and a 1x8 here for more theoretical redundant parts, it also gave you a larger, wider area to shoot at them. This is going to be fairly difficult for anybody to shoot that back frame off if they even manage to get off that one. And of course, most people aren't just shooting at, you know, frames or movement parts. They're generally shooting at the cabin, at the internals, at the weapons. So it didn't really feel necessary. As a result, especially because again we're trying to max out that armor a bit more, did let me fit these additional roof parts down the entire length of it, which is nice. We're still using a lot of cooling systems just because they're the only 8x2x2 part for armor in the game. Well, actually, sorry, there's 2 of them, but the other one is also Dawn's Children and is slightly more concave and thus has less durability, or is other even more concave variants giving even less durability. So it's the best for the size and shape by far. If we end up getting some Scavengers or Steppenwolf's heavy parts that end up fitting that better, obviously I'll look into it. But in the meantime, it's like the closest equivalent would be running 2 of the 8x2x1s, of which would double my part count for the same area. And then the other option would be a 8x4x1, which has the same volume, but as you can see, wouldn't really fit in these areas very well, especially for me wanting to keep, like I said, those roof slants. So it kind of be how it do for the time being. For the front, we didn't really change anything compared to prior version, other than adding this to help sort of blend in with the excavator parts on the side. Like I said, we lengthened that, and then we also shoved quite a few of our modules down here. So I'm not super sold on how they all fit together, but because of that additional track in the middle, we are fairly limited on our space. So again, we have those cooling systems going down the length. On the one side, trying to make this all flush, but on the other we have the Cyclops sideways sticking through it. The reason being that I tried, but I cannot fit both it and the Pegasus in the same space in a gap of only 8. So if I pushed back this additional back layer one further, which I could, didn't want to do though, then they can fit together fairly well as a 9x, but for this 8x, they literally don't fit together. So it seemed fairly logical to me to just slap that on the one side instead. And then as a result, we could fit in all these other modules, including the Pegasus. So the alternative being, if I did push it one back, I'd either have to mask the fact that there'd still be parts down this long, or I'd have to push the entire thing back, which then again would be off-centered. Don't really like the idea of that. So what I currently have instead is that transition for the APC rear, which lines up really well with the Sunatis, however you pronounce it, into the APC doors. As a result of this being on the edge, though, on the end and vertical, it pushes over the other armor pieces by 1. So that ends up giving us sort of the shape that we ended up with, because when you have those 8 pips of length, it goes right up to here, and while that gives me another 8x8 chamber to put all the modules, it means that I can't really have it be 8x9 without having to replace this with an 8x3, which at best we don't really have any good options for that. It'd be the Avian narrow wing, which is like 60 durability instead of 140. And it also has some convexity to it, so it doesn't fit nearly as well. So I figured just doing this and essentially having it offset where you have the one vertical edge here and then the one vertical edge up here kind of just worked out the best, especially because we actually have a 4x3x1 part that we have 2 of, which kind of almost fits in each direction, the size and shape and aesthetic of it. Likewise, we actually aren't connected properly for here, but like it's close enough, it's not really super noticeable. So like when we can line things up perfectly, obviously I'll go ahead and do that, but otherwise, if not, if there's something that's, you know, like without looking at it from a specific angle, like at a glance looks decent enough, then I'm just going to roll with that. And the front parts do that, and then also allow me to have the power of 2 parts elsewhere. For the unders and internals, pretty straightforward. We have a 2x8 frame here, so we had to shove the ammo packs forward and down. We could have also theoretically kept them vertical, but I didn't really see the benefit to doing that, and that also leaves with more dead space for frames. So I have them like this. Haven't really thought of anything clever I could fill these areas in with otherwise, but you know, at least they're more or less protected. These ammo packs are connected directly, and these are actually base ammo packs, so we can also improve that. Because we have these, although theoretically we'll eventually replace them with the mass upgrades instead, but that's not a immediate concern. So anyway, those are attached to the Odin, which snakes around this frame here. I have thought a few times about trying to have a longer frame in the center and then pulling these frames on the back forward, but what that's going to end up doing is increasing the amount of parts that I'm spending on frames, because 2x8 is already the longest frame I have, and we're already connected by 2 of them, and it goes right to the end. It doesn't feel like it would accomplish much, especially since we have the Odin there. We'd at best be looking at something like a 4x4, which is the same health as a 2x8, and then again pull these back, so we still have the same health and the same number of frames that are actually like that these are all attached to. We've just changed its shape, and then we've also pulled these up, so I'd have to look at changing the back or leaving empty space, neither which I particularly like. So the 2x8 answer seems fine. Again, I have a little bit of a dead space there, the 4x2x1, because of the Odin's shape, but again, doesn't really feel like there's anything more clever to put there. Now, the biggest change slash problem is while changing from the Omamori, which is 5 long, to the Averter, which is 4 long, did help me have the parts fit a little bit better for that whole power of 2 thing. Certainly it'd be more difficult to fit the Omamori wrapped around the front of the frames. That was actually a big issue I had with the prior version, which I suppose we can actually show here. So it wasn't really any better of a solution either. Lots of small, weak frames that were directly attached to the cabin, which did at least kind of like loop around to have some redundancy, but I was basically just treating it like a 6x4 area anyway with the additional 4x1 parts, which is to say the entire front of the vehicle was entirely dependent on a grand total of 90 durability. So not very secure, especially against fire or ice, of which there's certainly a lot nowadays. And then again, the Omamori, the concerns with depleting its pool too rapidly, especially because not only would we be attached to the weapon and the cabin, but also all these frames fit around it. The Averter kind of tidied up in some ways, made it worse than others. So while it does allow me to put it off to one side and thus solve, you know, the whole power of 2 thing with the width, because the cohort is so finicky with where its pips are, that actually means that the only one that's attached to the cabin directly is a 2x4 on this front. So that doesn't quite solve all of the issues. It kind of just pushes it around, but I'd rather have a single 2x4 than 3 1x4s. Even though the math is in favor of 3 1x4s, you can of course lose them all to AoE damage. And additionally, if I really feel like it's a problem, I can always just replace it. So I chose the 2 6x4s on the side to fill up the space and also attach to the and also to attach the armored tracks, because their pips aren't actually far enough back to attach to the other frames there or the frame on the very front. But I could replace this with a 4x4 or even an 8x4 if I felt it was necessary. I don't really want to do that because that leaves another ugly kind of 2x4 gap, but it is an option at the very least. Actually, now that I mention it, if I did do that, that would actually let me slap the iris down there, which isn't exactly something I'm having issues with fitting up here. would definitely be a lot more exposed, and I don't really have any other armor to fit in there. But again, if I'm feeling like it's problematic, it is another option. So I could do that, for instance. But I mean, just due to how this works, there's not really an ideal answer. I want to put them sideways, but the cohort's front row of pins doesn't connect to anything, not even non-frame pins, so I wouldn't be able to actually boost both of them with that. I would then only be boosting the Avalanche or the cohort. Well, I want to have them both boosted, and again, even if I could do that, we'd have to be off on one side, so we'd have one one important, I'm forgetting the word, but essentially one frame that I can't afford to lose. So it's just sort of a, the best of what options I have currently, and unfortunately, because the Avalanche is 7 pips long, I do still have the gap at the edge, which I've currently just used a 1x8 frame block for. But again, if I was super desperate for parts or refactoring or whatever, I could take it off likewise with these mostly decorative truck front parts. But, having the options is nice. I don't have to necessarily do any of them, but they are there if I so feel the need. So, a lot closer to that mass limit. Of course, again, a large part of that is just due to changing out the cabin for a mass cabin. Realistically, I'd want Dura and mass limit on the cabin and Dura on the Avalanche, but those are not the upgrade parameters I have, so I can't really do anything about that without wanting to sink, or not wanting, but explicitly not wanting to, but without having to sink in thousands of coins into re-upgrading them, especially waiting for an upgrade event or waiting for that ideal fusion to show up. But most of the fusions are not explicitly what I want. They're just like what is meta or popular, and generally doesn't even include off meta items very frequently. So the chances of those specific items showing up to begin with and then being the exact changes I want, pretty low. The alternative of waiting for an upgrade event and then tossing stabilizers and additional copies of that item at it is a little bit more reasonable, but even then it's a 1 in 2 chance every time, and you can lose that bet multiple times in a row, as happened with my Yokozuna upgrade before we got the, again, almost, but pretty damn close to ideal upgrade with the last mini battle pass. So it's the sort of thing where, like, it's fine for the time being. Like, I don't need to have everything on every build maxed out with the absolute ideal upgrades. While it would be nice, it's kind of prohibitively expensive, and again, I'm not even using a lot of these builds for other things. So for instance, having the upgraded modules from the battle passes is nice. Having upgraded parts that end up being in a lot of different builds rather than just these ones is completely reasonable, especially when we're looking at mostly epics and under. But looking at re-upgrading those, not so much. Likewise, unlikely to upgrade my Odin or my armored tracks, just for the pretty high amount of cost involved and the relatively minor results thereof. So we can repaint this since we replaced those crates with the paint which I already schooled past. Got the right co-driver. We still got a rep bonus at 25. And like I said, you can see we have a few parts for the parts limit that we could take out if we really needed to, but we're only dealing with like 260, 270 spare mass at the moment. So it's close enough that I'm not too concerned about absolutely like min-maxing every point, especially because, I mean, as shown, we don't really have the space to fit a whole lot of other parts that fit well. Like there's those 2x4s and whatnot underneath the fenders, but like you're not going to be able to put any real amount of armor or get any real amount of durability out of doing that. And the alternative being just replacing these cooling systems with those APC sides, which again, I don't really want to do that, because you have two 8x2x1 side by side. People shoot it with an explosive especially, they're probably going to blow off both of them at the same time anyway. So like, you're not really actually getting any additional effect out of it. But that will be the updated version of that. I believe we are on 2.17.12 still. So we'll save it as U17 and then upload it as, again, the Jawbreaker. And then, again, maybe in the future, reconsider the minigun one. Kind of annoying that you can't add tags when you save it either. Only when you upload. It would be nice to be able to just have those on ahead of time and then not ever have to re-update them. But, again, that's not the way they do things, so sucks to suck. So let's say, yeah, sure, if they subscribe. I mean, they're subscribed anyway, so why not? If they didn't want notifications, they shouldn't be subscribed. So call it a art build, because again, it's not really useful in anything other than like maybe medium PvE. Definitely durable. And then we could use cannon. I'm not too generally a fan of descriptive ones rather than prescriptive, but I don't know that any of these are really going to work better. I guess like tracks. Yeah, essentially all the same sort of thing. So if we were to label this descriptively, I think saying it's a track build, i.e. a tank build, is probably the most relevant. Very high durability, which is the point. And, you know, it's primarily art. We could also look at maybe saying close combat, or, you know, cannon, or PvE, or medium PvE, but I think this is probably the best way to look. Well, I guess both of them would be tracked, so maybe it makes sense to label this with cannon to separate it from its MIG version. And then obviously they'd both be durable, they'd both be art builds, but the other one would actually be functional. So we could probably swap it out for at least a medium PvE title. So that should work. Of course it doesn't immediately show us there, but that should be right up here. Yep. And then we can remove the prior version, and then delete the blueprint slot because we're not really using it. Slap another one in, which is another build that we'll go over. I mean, essentially I could just go over and rename the stream Avalanche, I suppose. Not opposed to it. Maybe we'll do that. It's not the worst idea. But yeah, like then, like I said, even with the other spreadsheet, like a big problem with a lot of these ones with like reloading is just the energy changes hit them pretty hard, especially because a lot of them are using medium cabins. So like unless you were a legendary heavy cabin, or a legendary medium cabin, or a light cabin, update was kind of rough for energy changes, so most of them ended up suffering. So for instance with this one, I can look at upgrading the generator and then putting on a third snowfall, but I need to remove other modules. For a few of these are complete reworks. This one actually gained a point, so slapping on a Cyclops is pretty easy, but I'm still uncertain of if Pegasus is going to be better than Geagle, especially since like you don't need more than 3 Goliath tracks, even with a ideal circumstance cohort Grizzly Pegasus. You don't need the tonnage from a 4th Goliath. And then same thing, energy changes here, potentially looking at putting on another Snowfall. Pretty limited. So to go over this really quickly, this is a sort of a continuation of the op armor build, playlist series function, where we're looking at basically min-maxing the effective health of something. So in this case, rather than the build health, we were looking at min-maxing weapon health. So this is running the Avalanche again. It is directly connected to the Machinist cabin for a 35% durability increase. Its perk itself is, of course, further damage resistance. We have the cabin perk, which gives us more mass and also damage resistance if they hit the cabin. We have an Omamori directly attached to it. And then we also have the Fin Whale, which normally you can't reach the, speeds of, but with the buggy wheels we can. So this thing is a absolute fucking monster, where the only thing I think I could do better is getting, slightly different upgrades and then getting a friendly cohort to buff me. But the math on this works out that this thing has I think it's 13,000 fucking health. It's ridiculous. Also, completely overkill for, most purposes and completely underwhelming for the actual ones you do want to use it for. So do you need 12,000, 14, 15, 16,000 health on your gun in raids? Not really. I mean, that is more health than the rest of this build probably put together, honestly. Almost, yeah, 17,000. And so the rest of it, when you take off the durability of that, would be more than the 13 or so thousand here. And cannons just don't do good in raids. So actually that other one, Jawbreaker, I brought that into an easy raid and I got, let's see if I can find, data theft. I got 29 copper. I had 1,200 damage by the end of it. People just running vectors had 7,000. It was just not good. Talking about the essentially, so that's actually one of the things that I have spreadsheet. So when you're looking at the available mass of cabins for the Nova, now mind, this doesn't include upgrades, but even just off the hop, you can see it has the highest available mass compared to the others. The Munin and the Master are pretty close, especially funny for the Master, since that was originally a light cabin and the Munin was originally a heavy cabin. But in any case, they're very comparable. If you look at the other stats other than just the available mass, and available mass is just mass limit minus mass. So for instance, the Master has a significantly lower mass to it, but also has a lower mass limit. When you look at having a upgrade for mass limit though, you're going to get a bit more out of this one since it's 15,000 rather than 14,000, though the Munin is also slightly higher with its plus 100 mass limit, but it also has plus 400 mass to it. So to answer your question, the Nova is still the pseudo heavy cabin, the old classification quote unquote tank cabin. And I mean, obviously it has a defensive shield, so you get a lot more mileage for defense as far as medium cabins go with the Nova than most others, by a pretty sizable gap. And we did actually have, what is it? I think it was under the prior mini battle pass, wasn't it? There was a Nova, oh, it's this one. Yeah, there is a Nova fusion for Dura max speed mass limit. So that is the ideal fusion, even more so than mass limit, the way the math works for most builds. So if I didn't already have a fairly comparable one, then I would definitely look at getting it that way. But as it stands, I'm not going to pay another 8,000 coins just to have the first parameter be different, because I mean, that's cool, but I'm not that desperate for another 200, 300, 400 points of durability as to spend 8,000 coins on that. But this is, yeah, also, like, this is just the first pass. I literally built this the one time. I haven't gone back and, like, remessed around with it, because, again, it's terrible for PvE, and it's terrible for PvP. Like, I have all these wheels just sitting out on the side, just waiting to get shot off. And so I was thinking, like, potentially the best thing I could do for chaining this out would actually be to take the place of Gaia, which is the two-person large-ass coupled build. So if I can fit this one on the front of this, then it will not only not have issues with keeping the buggy perk active, since I'll be suspended in the air, so I'll always be driving at quote-unquote max speed. They'll be protected by the legs on the side. I won't have to worry about driving in one direction and aiming another, so adapting it into this might end up working better, especially because, like, Gaia can only boost damage on so many different parts at once. So the purpose of this is to have a tankier cabin build, but as a result, especially with how difficult it is to get an Averter or Omamori on multiple snowfalls, like, this only has 1500 durability even if I put on a third snowfall. Even if I look at throwing on a fin whale rather than a Geagle or other things, like, there's all these trade-offs, and so I think it just makes sense to have the two separate builds. Have one that's designed to cabin tank that also happens to have, you know, the weapons that can actually output damage, and then I can have this absolute fucking unit where it's like, yeah, you're not going to be able to de-gun me, so you're either going to have to take out the entire build carrying both of them, or try and find some sneaky way to try and get underneath or cabinet or whatever, because this is a pretty big unit. It's not very complex either, admittedly, but it doesn't really accomplish much on its own. So let's throw these out. So that's where the Avalanche sits. We have the fin whale right beside it behind the freight train plow, because the freight train plow is the single highest durability part in the game. It is approximately the same shape as the front of the Avalanche, which means it can take up the other half of this interior fairly well. It doesn't interfere with the weapon's firing angle due to that little vertical cutout there, which is horizontal in this case, but anyway, there's a little bit of wiggle room for it to fire around it. And then we have our other modules. So Oculus, just because I had one extra energy, why not? If I figured something else out or get, you know, better generator or something, whatever, I'll do that. We have the generator tucked underneath as per usual. We have the ammo pack in the nook of the machinist, which it's perfectly designed for. And then the thing I'm most proud about is actually fitting the Cyclops and the Omamori in the larger cubby of the machinist. So, I mean, you can see it's a pretty tight fucking fit. Like, they only fit this one way. Unfortunately, it does mean that the Omamori is attached to other components. So, attached to the cabin in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different places. Not that the amount matters, but in any case, it's attached to more than just the one part I want to boost, which is the Avalanche. And also, I think, yeah, attached to the Cyclops there, because of the little nodes on its end. So, like, these other things taking damage will also deplete the health pool. So it's not quite like 16,000 health the entire way through. It would only be if you took enough damage to pop the Omamori, not take any additional damage, not have any of the additional damage hit the Omamori, run away, let it recharge, rinse, repeat. But in any case, like, on paper, you're not going to get better with an Averter or any other module. So at least it's fairly straightforward built, just because all of this shit is so heavy. And then on the side, I just put like 2 layers of armor because, you know, protecting the cabin and the side of the Avalanche is fairly reasonable, especially because we have the fin whale right there, which if we lose that, we lose like literally half of the damage resistance on it, and then also, you know, would be immediately overmass significantly. So not much to that build, but it's there in any case. Durability on a raid build better. What do you mean? You're talking about, oh, they already left. Well, I'm going to answer that question anyway. So if they're talking about durability versus mass, the way the calculation works is you're looking at a mass decrease of just the cabin, so a flat amount, which in case of the cohort is about 850 points of mass, or plus 10% durability for everything relevant to your cabin. So if you have your cabin durability of 500-ish with the cohort to begin with, and then it has a durability fusion, it bumps that up, and then additionally any additional armor you put on it also gets that boost. So if you have 500 cabin durability and 7,500 armor durability, you get 8,000 cabin health, so that the armored car durability, that health bar at the bottom, and then that goes up by another 10%. So if you look at, so 8,000 is just an example total. You're probably going to be closer to 4,000 durability on a lot of these builds, if that. But if you look at 4,000 durability for a reasonable cohort build, and you add 10% to that, that's going to be 400 durability. If you look at, and mine too, that gets multiplied by other things, your damage resistance, your damage reduction, the parts and their respective faction resistances, the nature of spacing the armor or not spacing the armor, it getting hit, damage passed through, etc., etc., etc. So that plus 10% durability ends up generally being a lot more than just a flat 400 health, whereas with the cohort cabin again, for instance, which I believe is the heaviest cabin, if you're saving 800 mass on that, and you convert that into vehicle durability anyway. Now, it's a different story if you're doing things like adding more modules, but generally speaking, your build is not going to choose to not have modules just due to mass. You're going to skimp on armor instead, or look at lighter parts or ones with different ratios. If you are upgrading the armor on your build, and you're looking at having an extra 800 mass for that, then you're not really getting 400 durability out of it comparably. So, for instance, if you're running the cohort, you're probably going to be running those heavier, larger, solid chunks, and you get about 1 durability for every 2.5 mass, which is to say, if you get another 800 mass, you're looking at about another 300 durability. And mind too, that's if you have additional parts, which requires you to have part limit for it. It requires you to have the additional space for them, having the part count itself, like there's only 6 APC roof parts. Even if you save 12,000 mass, you can't get any more of those. You have to use other parts. And you are also going to have to worry about like physically spacing them so they're again protected from explosions, or having them fit, having them look nice if you have any sense of aesthetic in the game whatsoever. So I know mass is touted as the god fusion, and realistically, if you're looking at like seal clubbing situations, it is, because saving mass is equivalent to being able to not run an engine in a lot of circumstances, and you also don't need to fill the remaining durability with parts in order to get that bonus. But yeah, anytime, like I said, especially if you're looking at the largest cabins, and if you're looking at the like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 durability, an extra 10% of that, again, multiplied by things like damage resistance, tend to go a lot further. It is essentially, yeah. So the other note for it is that the parts still lose that extra durability if they're shot off directly. So it's most relevant if they are shooting the cabin directly. So for instance, I don't know if I have a Durabastion. No. Okay. So we'll just do, first off, we'll close that because they're starting to pop off again. And we'll just make a shitty build here real quick, since we have the two different cohorts. So if we have our non-Dura cohort, then it's going to have the 600 durability by default, not 500, my bad. And then we can also take off Grizzly to lose the additional durability bonus there, which by the way is multiplicative, making plus dura even more useful. But you have 609 durability. If you slap on a part with, for instance, 141 durability, then it goes up by 141, you now have 750. If you instead use the durability cabin, then not only does it have the base durability of 670, that 10% applies to it, but also applies to this. So rather than 670 plus 141, it's 609 plus 141 times 1.1. So you can see the dura jumped from 750 to 825. And again, for a single part, it doesn't really matter. But once you start getting a lot of these, generally, like if I'm making any large builds, I'm normally exhausting the parts count for a lot of the larger ones, because especially when you're running, you know, something like the Pegasus engine, like you have a lot of mass to play around with, and you run into parts limit issues far before you run into mass issues. So for instance, with this setup, we have 2868 versus 2607 multiplied by damage reduction divided by the remainder of damage resistance, and so it ends up having a fairly sizable effect. So it's the sort of thing where, like, again, since losing all of these parts also gets rid of all the extra durability. So for instance, I swap back to this, we're at 2868. If you have these all attached by a rift, for instance, just so we can see it. As I fail to find my rifts. Here we go. So we're still 2868, and in fact we can actually even go the extra step and show you that this multiplies with Grizzly. So it goes up to over 3,000. But if we lose all these parts, if they get shot off directly, then we still go back down to 670, even though each of these only still has 141 durability. So if we do this, we pop them all off, we go back down to, oh, that's funny, sorry, 704, because it's 670 times 1.05 of Grizzly. So 704, which means that while this is now worth 110% or 115%, for the durability you get out of it, it will still take its 141 durability minus those other resistances. So if it gets hit with 141 damage of melee, you lose that part, and you lose the 141 plus those additional bonuses on the cabin. So durability is going to be better, like I said, mathematically, as long as they don't shoot off all your armor parts. But most people go for guns and then cabin, so it's not too much of a risk in my opinion. And it's certainly a lot easier to do durability because it just multiplies what you have. You don't have to rebuild because you do or don't have a mass fusion. It's the sort of thing where, like, especially your example with the Bastion, like, is having a, you know, well, even here's an example, my two Bastions, right? Like, I got one off of a event fusion, and then I had the other one that I just fused randomly at one point. So, like, is going from mass self-destruction time mass limit to mass max speed mass limit worth it? Especially when it was 3 kph, yeah, and I'm running them on big rams. But now that it's only 3%, maybe not. Likewise, is it worth refusing something, spending another half or 2/3 the cost it took you to upgrade it to begin with? Is it worth doing that to change one parameter out to durability or damage resistance? Maybe not. So in your example of having a damage resistant Bastion, that's actually ideal if you're going to have a Omamori attached to it. The reason being is because the Omamori has a health pool that gets exhausted when it, you know, takes 300 damage, which is half of the cabin damage. So since the Bastion cabin already has a 50% damage reduction, you would have to deal 1,200 damage. The Bastion would take 600 damage because it's halved, and then the Omamori would take half of that, so 300 damage. You'd have to deal 1200 to the cabin to exhaust the Omamori, cause a recharge cycle. But if you have plus 10% durability on the Bastion, that doesn't change. It still takes 1200 damage. If you have damage resistance on the cabin, then instead of having to deal 1200 damage, you have to deal the additional 10% damage resistance damage as well, so closer to 1320 damage. So now you are requiring them to deal extra damage for the same effect, which is exhausting your Omamori. And that's because durability, damage resistance, damage reduction, they all multiply together. So you end up getting outsized effects when they're all equal. It's like if you multiply 4 by 1 or 2 by 2, you get the same result. But if you increase one value by 10% versus two values by 10%, you get larger effects. So 4.4 times 1 is just 4.4, but 2.2 times 2.2 is going to be a higher value. So it's math, which is unfortunate because I do really try and avoid math, but it's fucking everywhere, especially in system designs and games. Like, you can't just not do it if you want like the ideal results. And so likewise, because that's a thing, you want even more damage resistance. So you'll have Grizzly as your perk. You'll ask for a teammate to run a cohort and give you a buff. You'll look at the Omamori having a damage resistance buff rather than a durability or mass. Stuff like that. So it's a fairly complex relationship overall. And so it's not like there's ever generally a one best answer. So for instance, if you're not using an Omamori, if you're using a Averter, having durability on the cabin is better. If you're seal clubbing and you don't have 2000 extra durability for it, then having the mass is better. Stuff like that. It's not like a one size fits all answer, but the reason why I explicitly recommend durability is because, again, it doesn't require rebuilding whenever you do or don't have that upgrade. And mathematically, it'll either be equivalent to damage resistance or mass for most things, and better under optimal circumstances. So, hopefully that gives you some illumination as to the situation. But, yeah, it's, I've spent no small amount of time spreadsheeting all this shit. Like, it's literally an entire series on the YouTube channel of videos and a not insignificant amount of time of me spreadsheeting these different things. So for instance, this is a calculation for the Avalanche. So that build that was just on screen, if I have all of these active, so for instance, I don't have the durability upgrade on the Avalanche. You could also have the damage resistance one instead, but you'll see that that ends up being a lesser value by a significant amount, since again these values multiply to each other. And I can't guarantee I'm going to have a cohort buff active. Even if I do, it's only for 7-10 seconds at a time. But for instance, for that build on screen, I'm looking at about 14,000 effective durability on it, so long as I don't lose the Omamori and then not recharge it. But yeah, it's not quite a simple thing. So likewise, I've gone through your threads. So I went through and explained this with like clanmates as well. Like, it's a fuck ton of math, but you can at least use the results to, answer questions. It's just a hell of a lot of effort to get there. But that's essentially the point of these builds that I was showing in the stream anyway. This for being an absolute fucking chonker for the Avalanche, using that as armor. This for having the stacking of damage reduction with damage reduction. And then for the one on exhibition, which is stacking damage resistance with damage resistance, just because it's more convenient, and also because that it fits the style of the build a bit better. But yeah, I guess we can... Same amount of fuel, I already spent that today. So I can't really show that in, I can't run a raid and show it. But suffice to say, both of these like suck in raids, just because anything that reloads does as, you know, it's a sustained attrition fight. But what we can do, I suppose, is we can bring this into a couple of PvP matches. Though I know it's not going to perform well. But, you know, just for lols, we're here anyway. Yeah, well, that's because they changed the system, right? So we had a 1 energy, 2 energy, 2 3 energy, and 2 4 energy. And then we had 1 2 3 4 5. And then they decided to double the energy system and then take away 1 point from the lights. So this is a light generator, contrary to what its stats of 100 durability for 36 mass might lead you to believe. So it became the 2 energy version, but we didn't have one in between the gas gen and the big G, so there wasn't a 3 energy equivalent. So that's what they're fixing, and then likewise people are speculating we might get a common generator at some point, which is for 1 energy. I don't know whether or not that's actually going to be the case, but like it certainly is possible. Not really anything stopping them from doing it. So I'm just probably going to get my ass sniped by, yeah. Oh, hi team. Don't mind me. Or that ledge, apparently. Well, there goes that bot. Or that was a teammate for a hot sec, that would have sucked. Or sorry, an enemy, rather than a teammate. Not that we're going to have a really good chance of 4v6 anyway. Or me missing all my shots. Another one gone. That's awkward. Just have the durability tank you. Can't do much about this guy though. Never mind multiple of them. Yeah. This is just the PvP experience for me anyway. Me being in a 1v6, I'm gonna reload weapons, so of course I just GG lose anyway. But like I said, I really wasn't expecting big things out of this. I'm walking into this knowing that, like, not only is this a bad build, but it's an incredibly bad build for 17,000 power score. But hey, that's why we slapped the art build tag on it, rather than anything else. Also notwithstanding my own user skill or lack thereof. Especially since I literally haven't used this since the projectile speed change on it. They significantly buffed its parameters to make it more usable, but I'm not used to it. Used to it being a fucking bowling ball. RIP that dude. Hopefully it's just a bot. I don't take it too personal. Well, see, I would love to rush in with you, but I'm actually running a fucking cannon with a 10-second reload, so not really my department to join you, Mr. Flamedog. Uh-huh. Yeah, especially when I hit myself. Same map, another Alphas. Hello, don't mind me. I'm also not going to win against a dude with a 2.5 second reload. Never mind him and his two closest buddies. Yeah, like I said, that Nova is very nice. So, if you don't have an upgraded Nova, if you don't have a Nova at all, not a terrible idea to pick one up. Because most of these other ones are kind of mid. Like a clanmate traded in a Memori for Waltz, and it's like the Waltz are worth like 3k each unupgraded, and the Omamori by itself is 8k. So you're trading down multiple times. Feels bad.
Let's go. Follow me, guys.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful when you fight bot builds that are made terribly. You can get a soft target, but I mean, we've seen how well this does against other players. So there you go. If you have teammates clutch / draw aggro, and you just fight bots that don't know how to build or how to play, then the build is fine. But even that, it's not really anything spectacular, especially because, you know, we got that fat ass reload time, and we're slow, so we're not very good at playing the peak game, and we don't have any shielding, so we can't even like do bubble peeking. But hey, she looks good, so what else do you need? Oh, this thing has such terrible traverse too. Like, they buffed all the rotation speeds of most of the other weapons, but Avalanche still does not buzz. And sure shit, I'm not slapping the oppressor on this build. Nor am I apparently turning around right now. Oh, that's fine, game. I didn't want to deal with the dude shooting at me anyway. No biggie. Yeah, one of the teammates didn't even bother sticking around. But hey, look at that, I did better than half the team this time. I only shot like 4 times too. But crazy, that big chonky tank. Can't really do much about. Dude's flying up in his fucking face when the rest of the team is dead. But you know, anytime teammates want to stay alive more than 30 seconds, be a great time. Also open to name suggestions on this other one. But, I said, probably do something. It's not like I'm just going to toss it up on it. Well, I mean, I guess I could theoretically toss it up on exhibition, but not immediately concerned about it. Since, like I said, I want to do something with it. Whether or not it's adapting it to be coupled with Atlas, or it's redoing the armor somehow to try and protect the buggy wheels more. But yeah, current version, I mean, it's even worse than this one. And I mean, we're seeing how this one's going, so I mean, hell, I'm still getting lobbies which are just half bots anyway. But yeah, if you actually want to run the Avalanche, it's basically Hadron and King at high power score, or Dead Man at low power score, or Bust. It's just far too crippled and slow to run like this. I like Spall. And then we get the Destructor clan. Imagine that, that has problems too. Yeah, our other teammate didn't even stick around. So it was a 5v5 to begin with, and these guys are just, of course, just insta-killing anything. So, yeah, you know, matchmaking is a cesspool as per usual, but... I was really only planning on having this be like a 30-minute stream, TBH. So I can go play Baldur's Gate. So I think I'm probably going to go and do that now, since I showed more than I wanted to. Well, not that I don't want to, but more than I was expecting to for builds anyway. And then getting steamrolled by PvP. But, like, I mean, I knew that was going to happen. But, yeah, I mean... It's not like I'm really playing a whole lot of PvP right now anyway, just because I don't really have anything to do there. Like, my option is either join people like that and just farm fuel and grief randos, or don't play. So, mostly just not playing right now and just doing builds and build updating. Not like I don't have a thick-ass backlog of them to do, but yeah, I'm going to hop over and kill some gobbies.